What if the stranger you were forced to legally bind yourself to the Omega you swore to keep at arm's length turned out to be the only person your alpha heart ever truly loved? Secrets, buried memories, and a hidden identity collide in this story of undeniable destiny. Rain lashed against the towering stained glass windows of St. Jude's Cathedral, casting fractured prisms of light across the marble floor. The storm outside perfectly mirrored the turbulent tempest brewing within Nathaniel Caldwell. As the ruthless heir to the Caldwell shipping empire, Nathaniel was heavily accustomed to high-stakes acquisitions and brutal corporate negotiations. Yet this particular merger felt like a veritable death sentence. Standing rigidly at the altar in a bespoke charcoal suit, his broad shoulders impossibly tense, Nathaniel was the picture of an alpha furious at being caged. The air in the cavernous cathedral was thick with the cloying, mingling sense of high society's elite. Members of the Montgomery, Harrington, and Fitzgerald families whispered from the mahogany pews, their eager eyes fixed on the spectacle, gathered solely to witness the lucrative union of two dynasties. Down the long, imposing aisle walked Rowan Hayes. To the untrained eye of the elite observers, Rowan was the absolute epitome of a compliant, aristocratic Omega. His posture was flawless, his tailored white suit immaculate, and his beautiful expression completely unreadable. But beneath the polished, icy veneer, Rowan's heart pounded a frantic, erratic rhythm against his ribs. Medical-grade scent blockers generously applied, that morning heavily suppressed the natural sweet lavender and rain scent that would have instantly betrayed his soaring anxiety. Instead, he smelled of absolutely nothing, presenting a blank, sterile slate to the towering alpha waiting for him. Nathaniel's jaw visibly clenched as Rowan approached the altar. They had met precisely 3 times before today, each encounter a stilted, heavily chaperoned affair strictly orchestrated by their ambitious fathers. Nathaniel saw nothing but a spoiled heir, a pampered pawn in a corporate game designed to consolidate offshore shipping routes. He had absolutely zero intention of being a real husband. His heart, or what was tragically left of it, belonged entirely to a ghost. 5 years ago, after a devastating car crash in the Swiss Alps, left Nathaniel temporarily blinded and confined to a secluded rehabilitation clinic in Geneva, he had met someone. An Omega named Lee. Lee had been his dedicated nurse, his sole confidant, and eventually his passionate lover. They had shared whispered promises in the dark skin against skin, falling completely and hopelessly in love without Nathaniel ever once seeing the boy's face. Then, the very day Nathaniel's bandages were removed, Lee vanished without a trace. Nathaniel's father coldly informed him that the Omega had accepted a $2 million check to disappear forever. The betrayal had shattered Nathaniel's soul, hardening him into the icy, unyielding alpha standing at the altar today. Rowan stepped up beside him, the overwhelming scent of sharp frost and dark amber immediately washing over him. It was Nathaniel's scent, unmistakable, intoxicating, and devastatingly familiar. Rowan fought the desperate, agonizing urge to close his eyes and lean into that comforting aroma. He was Lee. 5 years ago, desperately fleeing a highly abusive Uncle Rowan, had used his middle name, Lee, and taken a discreet job as a private caregiver at the Swiss clinic under a falsified medical registry. He hadn't known the bandaged patient was a billionaire heir. He had only known the vulnerable broken alpha who desperately needed him. When Nathaniel's powerful family discovered their illicit bond, they hadn't just offered Rowan a check. They had threatened his very life and the lives of the few friends who had helped him hide. They ruthlessly drove Rowan away before Nathaniel ever opened his eyes. Forced back into the Hayes family fold, Rowan was meticulously groomed for this exact moment, sold off to the highest bidder, ironically to the man who already possessed his soul. The bishop's monotonous voice droned on, echoing through the cathedral. Nathaniel did not look at Rowan as they coldly exchanged vows. When it was time for the rings, Nathaniel grabbed Rowan's hand with a clinical detached precision. Rowan's slender fingers trembled slightly. Nathaniel completely missed the small faded scar on Rowan's left thumb, a permanent mark acquired from dropping a broken teacup in a Swiss chalet. He unceremoniously shoved the heavy platinum band onto Rowan's finger, his touch searing, yet utterly devoid of affection. "I pronounce you Alpha and Omega, bound by law and nature," the bishop declared. There was no kiss. Nathaniel merely gave a stiff, formal nod to the congregation. The extravagant reception that followed was a masterclass in social theatre. At the head table, the newlyweds sat seemingly miles apart. Arthur Hayes, Rowan's overbearing father, clinked his crystal glass and gave a booming speech about corporate synergy and family values, while Nathaniel downed a heavy glass of scotch, his furious gaze fixed on the storm raging outside the venue's panoramic windows. "You will have the master suite," Nathaniel murmured suddenly, his deep voice barely audible over the din of a string quartet playing in the corner. It was the very first time he had spoken directly to Rowan all evening. "I will occupy the guest wing. We will attend public functions together, smile for the hungry press, and play our parts perfectly. In private, we will live completely separate lives. Do not expect anything more from me, Rowan." Rowan stared blankly down at his untouched champagne. The harsh words cut far deeper than he anticipated. Without the visual context, and with Rowan's scent completely chemically suppressed, the Alpha was utterly oblivious to the fact that his long-lost Lee was sitting mere inches away. "Understood," Rowan replied softly, deliberately pitching his voice slightly higher and flatter than his natural tone to avoid sparking any latent memories. "I prefer it that way." Nathaniel's dark eyes snapped to Rowan for a fraction of a second, a sudden flicker of irritation crossing his handsome features. The sheer apathy in Rowan's response seemed to violently agitate the Alpha's protective instincts, but Nathaniel quickly masked it, pouring himself another drink. The long drive to the Caldwell penthouse in downtown Manhattan was suffocatingly silent. Rowan leaned his tired head against the cool glass, deep exhaustion seeping into his bones. As the glowing city lights blurred past, Rowan made a solemn, silent vow he would survive this agonizing marriage of convenience. He would keep his painful secret buried. Because if Nathaniel ever found out the truth, that the husband he openly despised was the lover he believed had maliciously betrayed him, the nuclear fallout would definitively destroy them both. Sunlight pierced brightly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan penthouse, illuminating a vast space that felt significantly more like a modern art museum than a welcoming home. It had been precisely 1 week since the wedding, and the strict boundaries Nathaniel had ruthlessly drawn were firmly in place. They existed entirely like two ghosts, haunting the same sprawling estate, their sparse interactions limited to curt nods in the hallway and brief, overly polite exchanges in front of the housekeeping staff. For Rowan, the profound isolation was a familiar, if deeply painful, cloak. He spent his quiet mornings tucked away in the library, a massive 2-story room filled with first editions and heavy leather-bound legal texts. It was a secure sanctuary. Nathaniel left for Caldwell Industries before the sun rose, and rarely returned before midnight. This predictable routine suited Rowan perfectly, allowing him to navigate the penthouse without his heavy scent blockers, giving his severely irritated skin a much-needed break from the harsh, pharmaceutical chemicals. On a surprisingly brisk Tuesday evening, Nathaniel returned unexpectedly early. A massive headache throbbed viciously behind his temples, the direct result of a grueling board meeting. He tossed his keys onto the marble console and shrugged off his suit jacket. The penthouse was deathly quiet, save for the faint, mournful sound of a cello drifting down the corridor, Bach's Cello Suite No. 1. Drawn by a sudden inexplicable magnetic pull, Nathaniel walked silently toward the heavy oak doors of the library. He didn't push them open immediately. Instead, he stood frozen in the hallway, his sensitive senses suddenly assaulted by a scent that made the alpha in him completely freeze. It was extremely faint, barely a whisper riding on the air currents of the penthouse's ventilation system, but it was undoubtedly there. Crushed lavender. Fresh rain on warm asphalt. A sweet, underlying warmth that completely bypassed Nathaniel's rational mind and struck directly at his primal core. Lee. Nathaniel's breathing hitched violently. He shoved the doors open. Rowan jumped, badly startled, nearly dropping the heavy book he was holding. He was curled up in a massive leather armchair by the roaring fireplace, wearing an oversized knit sweater that entirely swallowed his slender frame. At the sight of the towering Alpha, Rowan's eyes widened in sheer panic. He hadn't applied his scent blockers. "What are you doing here?" Nathaniel demanded, his tone rougher and more desperate than intended. He stepped aggressively into the room, his dark eyes frantically scanning the space, searching for the source of the phantom scent. "I was just reading," Rowan replied, his voice trembling slightly. He instinctively pulled the thick collar of his sweater up a highly defensive posture, trying to urgently mask the scent glands on his neck. Nathaniel tightly closed his eyes, taking a deep, ragged breath. The intoxicating scent was already rapidly fading, retreating behind the heavy smell of old paper and wood smoke. It was just a cruel trick of his exhausted mind, he reasoned logically. An olfactory hallucination brought on by severe stress and his lingering obsession. "Turn the music down. It's giving me a migraine." Nathaniel snapped, opening his eyes. He looked at Rowan, truly looked at him for the very first time since the altar. The Omega looked incredibly small in the chair, his messy brown hair falling softly into his eyes, looking far removed from the pristine, manicured heir he had married. For a fraction of a second, Nathaniel felt a strange, piercing pang in his chest, a sudden irrational urge to cross the room and wrap the shivering boy in a warm blanket. He immediately crushed the protective instinct. "And put on some proper clothes. Harrison Lockwood and Spencer Channing are coming over for drinks in an hour. I expect you to perfectly act the part of the gracious host." "Of course," Rowan whispered obediently, lowering his gaze. An hour later, Rowan gracefully descended the spiral staircase, fully transformed back into the perfect, untouchable Hayes heir. He wore a fitted, navy button-down dark slacks and a suffocatingly thick layer of medical-grade scent blockers. The modern living room was alive with the sound of clinking glasses and low, rumbling laughter. "Ah, the blushing bride," Harrison teased as Rowan entered, raising his expensive glass of bourbon. "We were just congratulating Nate on tying the knot. The merger caused Caldwell stock to aggressively jump 8% this morning." "I'm thrilled for the company's success," Rowan said smoothly, pasting on a flawlessly practiced hollow smile. Nathaniel watched his new husband incredibly carefully from his designated position by the window. There was something highly irritating about Rowan's flawless facade. He was far too polite, far too accommodating, and far too perfectly composed. It felt exactly like a meticulously crafted mask. As the evening wore on, the polite conversation shifted to an upcoming high-profile charity gala they were expected to host. Rowan sat on the absolute opposite end of the sofa from Nathaniel, quietly listening. When Spencer casually asked about the catering menu, Rowan smoothly interjected, "We should perhaps reconsider the seafood spread. Nathaniel is terribly allergic to shellfish." The room went completely devastatingly silent. Harrison stopped mid-sip. Spencer raised a highly suspicious eyebrow. Nathaniel's head violently snapped toward Rowan, his gaze turning incredibly dark and dangerous. "How did you know that?" Nathaniel asked, his voice dangerously low, slicing right through the heavy tension in the room. Rowan completely froze, his heart dropping like a stone into his stomach. He had slipped. 5 years ago in the Swiss clinic, a young nurse had nearly served Nathaniel a crab bisque, and Rowan had violently knocked the bowl out of her hands in sheer panic. It was a highly intimate detail, one that was aggressively guarded by the Caldwell PR team to prevent poisoning attempts by ruthless corporate rivals. It was definitively not public knowledge. Rowan swallowed hard, his mind frantically racing for a highly plausible lie. My father's assistant sent over a comprehensive medical brief on your dietary requirements before the wedding. Standard protocol for high-profile mergers. Nathaniel stared intensely at him, his dark eyes narrowed ruthlessly, dissecting the lie. It sounded plausible enough. Yet something about the specific way Rowan had spoken, the casual, deeply protective instinct laced in his soft tone, sent a violent shiver down Nathaniel's spine. It was a phantom echo of a loving voice from a dark hospital room in Geneva. Right. Of course, Nathaniel murmured coldly, though his expression remained fiercely guarded. Later that night, long after the guests had departed, Nathaniel sat alone in his private, dimly lit study. The heavy mahogany desk was covered in corporate financial reports, but Nathaniel's sole attention was fixed on a battered manila folder. Inside were grainy photographs and a newly filed private investigator's report from Detective Arthur Miller, detailing another dead end in the endless search for the Omega named Lee. Nathaniel aggressively ran a hand through his hair in deep frustration. He forcefully picked up his phone and dialed his investigator's number. Miller, Nathaniel commanded when the secure line connected. I need you to look into something else, immediately. I want a full, completely unredacted background check on my husband, Rowan Hayes. Go back exactly 5 years. Leave absolutely no stone unturned. Nathaniel hung up, staring dangerously at the closed door of his study. The perfect, completely scentless Omega, sleeping securely down the hall, was aggressively hiding something, and Nathaniel Caldwell always uncovered the truth. 3 days later, the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria was a dazzling sea of diamonds, bespoke tuxedos, and the stiflingly heavy pheromones of New York's absolute elite. The annual Maritime Charity Gala was the social event of the season, and as the newly minted power couple of the shipping industry, Nathaniel and Rowan were the undisputed center of attention. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the massive room, while a 12-piece orchestra played a lively symphony that completely failed to mask the ruthless corporate whispering echoing off the gilded walls. Rowan stood near a towering ice sculpture, a perfectly manicured vision in a midnight blue velvet suit that perfectly accentuated his slender frame. He held a flute of sparkling water, offering polite, entirely vacuous smiles to the endless parade of investors and socialites. Beneath the collar of his suit, his skin was burning. The heavy application of industrial-strength scent blockers he had used that morning was beginning to severely irritate his skin, causing a dull, persistent ache to radiate down his neck. The sheer stress of the highly public event was elevating his core body temperature, causing the chemical barrier to degrade far faster than he had originally anticipated. Across the cavernous ballroom, Nathaniel stood completely still, nursing a glass of scotch, while, ostensibly, listening to a boring monologue from a state senator. In reality, Nathaniel's dark, piercing gaze was locked entirely on his husband. An hour earlier, Nathaniel's encrypted phone had vibrated with a highly confidential preliminary email from Detective Arthur Miller. The private investigator had only needed 3 days to uncover a massive gaping hole in the Hayes family narrative. The email was stark and profoundly disturbing. According to the official corporate biography, Rowan Hayes had spent the year 2021 completing an exclusive intensive economics program at a remote campus in Scotland. However, Miller's relentless digging had completely shattered that alibi. No enrollment records exist for Rowan Hayes in Scotland during that time frame, the report read. Furthermore, flagged passport control data places the subject entering Geneva, Switzerland, under the legal name Rowan Lee Hayes, precisely 5 weeks before your accident. Geneva. Lee. The staggering revelation had struck Nathaniel like a physical blow to the chest, leaving him breathless and completely disoriented. His rational mind viciously fought against the impossible connection, desperately trying to write it off as a cruel, cosmic coincidence. Yet watching Rowan gracefully navigate the ballroom, Nathaniel felt a dangerous, primal possessiveness roaring to life in his blood. The alpha inside him was pacing wildly, demanding immediate answers, demanding to rip away the polished facade and uncover the terrified boy hiding underneath. Suddenly, the carefully orchestrated piece of the evening shattered. Connor Preston, the notoriously aggressive alpha heir to Preston Logistics and a bitter rival of the Caldwell Empire, smoothly detached himself from the crowd and cornered Rowan by the champagne fountain. Connor was a notoriously vile man, heavily relying on his oppressive rotting pine scent to violently intimidate omegas and submissive betas alike. Rowan, darling. Connor purred, stepping completely into Rowan's personal space. His heavy, suffocating pheromones rolled off him in aggressive, dominating waves. An absolute tragedy. Your father selling you off to a cold, ruthless bastard like Nathaniel. I always told Arthur I would pay double the dowry for a pretty little thing like you. Excuse me, Connor. I need to find my husband, Rowan stated sharply, his voice trembling slightly as he instinctively took a step back. The harsh scent of the rival alpha was making his stomach churn, violently, accelerating the degradation of his scent blockers. Oh, don't run away just yet. Connor sneered, his hand shooting out to aggressively grab Rowan's wrist. His grip was entirely too tight, his thumb bruising the delicate skin. Let's have a real conversation about what you're missing. Pure, unadulterated panic flared in Rowan's chest. His breathing hitched his heart, hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The intense spike of pure fear and adrenaline finally broke through the failing chemical barrier on his scent glands. From 50 feet away, Nathaniel instantly stopped breathing. It hit him with the devastating force of a freight train. The unmistakable, intoxicating aroma of crushed lavender and fresh rain washing over warm asphalt abruptly flooded the ballroom, slicing through the heavy mixture of expensive perfumes and stale champagne. It was terrified, distressed, and completely desperate. It was a silent biological scream for help. Lee. Nathaniel moved with terrifying, predatory speed. He completely ignored the senator mid-sentence, shoving past a group of startled investors. His own alpha scent, sharp winter frost, and dark amber exploded outward in a dominant, violent wave that immediately silenced the orchestra and caused several nearby guests to physically step back in sheer terror. Connor barely had time to register the approaching threat before Nathaniel's hand clamped down brutally on his shoulder. With a vicious, terrifying yank, Nathaniel tore the rival alpha away from Rowan, shoving him hard against the edge of the champagne table. Glasses shattered loudly onto the marble floor. If you ever touch my husband again, Nathaniel snarled his voice, dropping into a terrifying, inhuman alpha growl that reverberated through the silent ballroom. I will systematically dismantle your pathetic company and ruin your entire bloodline. Get out! Connor, pale and visibly shaking, practically scrambled over himself to flee the room, completely, thoroughly humiliated. Nathaniel immediately turned his fierce attention to Rowan. The Omega was visibly trembling, his chest heaving, as the scent of distressed lavender poured off him in thick, overwhelming waves. Without a single word, Nathaniel reached out and gently took the hand that Connor had bruised. As Nathaniel's thumb soothingly brushed over the trembling knuckles, his skin snagged on something small and slightly raised. Nathaniel's eyes darted down to Rowan's left thumb. There, starkly visible against the pale skin, was a small, crescent-shaped scar. The exact scar Lee had received when he dropped a porcelain teacup in the Swiss chalet. The bustling ballroom, the staring elite, the shattered glass, everything ceased to exist. Nathaniel stared intensely into Rowan's wide, terrified eyes, the absolute truth crashing down upon him with undeniable, world-shattering clarity. The boy he had been violently forced to marry was the ghost he had never stopped loving. Dragging his trembling husband through the opulent, winding corridors of the Waldorf Astoria, Nathaniel did not stop walking until they reached a highly secure, soundproofed VIP suite reserved entirely for the Caldwell family. He shoved the heavy mahogany doors open, pulled Rowan inside, and slammed the doors shut immediately, throwing the deadbolt. The deafening silence of the suite was a stark, jarring contrast to the chaotic ballroom they had just fled. Rowan backed away immediately, his shoulders hitting the heavy velvet drapes of the window. His scent was completely out of control now, the sweet lavender heavily laced with the bitter, sharp tang of absolute terror. He wrapped his arms around his torso defensively, fully expecting the legendary explosive Caldwell wrath. He had been discovered. The carefully constructed lie had finally crumbled, and he was completely at the mercy of an alpha who despised liars above all else. Nathaniel stood frozen by the door, his chest heaving, as he violently fought to rein in his roaring alpha instincts. He looked at the terrified boy cowering by the window. The pieces of the puzzle were violently locking into place, painting a horrifying picture of manipulation and deceit. "Rowan," Nathaniel rasped, his deep voice cracking under the weight of 1,000 suppressed emotions. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. Or should I say, Lee, Rowan squeezed his eyes shut, a single hot tear escaping and tracing a wet path down his pale cheek. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice incredibly fragile. "I'm so sorry, Nathaniel. I never wanted to deceive you, I swear." "You took $2 million. Nathaniel said, the old festering wound of betrayal suddenly flaring to life, making his tone incredibly harsh. "You took a massive payout from my father to disappear on the exact day my bandages were removed. You abandoned me in the dark." Rowan's eyes snapped open, a sudden flash of profound indignation breaking through his overwhelming fear. "I didn't take a single goddamn cent from your family," he shouted, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet room. Nathaniel physically recoiled, clearly stunned by the sudden outburst. "My father showed me the cashed check, Rowan. I saw the bank statements with my own eyes. Then your father is a master forger and a ruthless monster." Rowan fired back, hot tears now streaming freely down his face. The dam had finally broken, and 5 years of agonizing silence completely spilled out. "Do you have any idea what actually happened that morning I was walking to your room to celebrate your recovery? Your father's security team ambushed me in the hallway. They dragged me into the basement of the clinic." Rowan violently rubbed his wet cheeks, his scent shifting from terror to profound, devastating grief. "William Caldwell didn't just offer me money, Nathaniel. He told me he knew about my abusive uncle. He knew I was using a fake registry to hide. He violently threatened to have me deported back to my uncle's estate, where I would have been beaten to death. And worse, he threatened the nurses who helped me hide. He told me if I ever contacted you, if I ever breathed your name, he would destroy their lives too." Nathaniel felt the blood completely drain from his face. The room seemed to violently tilt on its axis. "No, that's impossible. My father—" "Your father thoroughly orchestrated my entire destruction to protect his precious heir from a nameless poor Omega," Rowan cried out, sliding slowly down the velvet drapes until he collapsed onto the plush carpet, burying his face in his trembling hands. "They forced me onto a private jet that very afternoon. I was sent back to my father, heavily punished for running away, and strictly groomed to become the perfect corporate pawn. I never stopped loving you, Nathaniel. Every single day was a living nightmare. And then they sold me to you. The agonizing truth hit Nathaniel with catastrophic force. His father had completely fabricated the betrayal. The man he had trusted most in the world had violently ripped his soulmate away from him, letting Nathaniel stew in toxic hatred and agonizing heartbreak for 5 entire years. All the cruel words he had spoken to Rowan since the wedding, the cold isolation, the harsh boundaries he had been fiercely punishing the victim of his own family's horrific cruelty. A ragged, animalistic sob tore its way completely out of Nathaniel's throat. He crossed the room in 2 massive strides and dropped heavily to his knees in front of his weeping husband. "Rowan," Nathaniel choked out, reaching out with trembling hands to gently pull the Omega's hands away from his tear-stained face. "Look at me. Please, baby, look at me." Rowan slowly opened his red, puffy eyes, completely startled by the forgotten term of endearment. "I am so entirely, deeply sorry," Nathaniel whispered, his own tears finally falling, landing softly on Rowan's knuckles. "I was a complete fool. I should have searched harder. I should have known my Lee would never abandon me for money. I will completely destroy my father for what he did to you. I swear on my life no one will ever hurt you again." Rowan stared at the powerful weeping Alpha, the scent of sharp winter frost finally wrapping around him in a warm, fiercely protective embrace completely devoid of its previous icy distance. Without another word, Rowan threw his arms around Nathaniel's neck, burying his face in the crook of the Alpha's shoulder. Nathaniel violently pulled him flush against his chest, wrapping his massive arms around the slender Omega, holding him as if he were terrified Rowan would vanish into thin air again. "You're safe," Nathaniel murmured fiercely against Rowan's hair, his Alpha instincts finally settling into a deep, profound peace as he inhaled the rich scent of lavender and rain. "You are completely mine, and you are finally home." In the quiet sanctuary of the VIP suite, surrounded by the ruins of a 5-year deception, the cold, untouchable Alpha finally found his long-lost heart, completely realizing that the political marriage he had severely dreaded was actually the universe beautifully righting a terrible wrong. The shocking truth is finally out. Nathaniel's father orchestrated the ultimate betrayal, but love and destiny proved far too powerful for any corporate conspiracy to destroy. Now that Nathaniel has uncovered his beautiful Omega's agonizing secret, the Caldwell Empire is about to face the ultimate Alpha's wrath. Did this emotional Omegaverse reunion leave you absolutely breathless? If you loved this intense, twist-filled story of fate and hidden identities, smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and hit subscribe for more incredible BL audio dramas.